Welcome to Paradigm Shifts with your host, Kayshia Kruger. As an organization development practitioner and executive coach, I work with leaders to create positive changes in the workplace using behavioral science. And here, we're on a mission to rethink the way we work, lead, and ultimately live. So, let's unpack light bulb moments for paradigm shifts within your workplace and beyond. Are you ready for a shift? Let's dive in. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Paradigm Shifts podcast, where we are going to be talking about authenticity. So authenticity is a word we throw around a lot in leadership, but what does it really mean in practice? Is it just about being honest, or is this a deeper layer to leading with integrity? And how do you show up in a balanced way authentically while cultivating executive presence that commands respect? Lots of questions, and these are the questions that keep so many leaders up at night. And so I've brought on someone to help us out. We have the perfect guest today. We have Rachel Burr with us, and she has over 2 decades of experience coaching CEOs and executives across industry. And she brings a unique blend of insight from background in organization development and clinical psychology. She's helped leaders advance to new levels, navigate complexity. Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're just going to jump right in here. I'm curious. People often say that being genuine is a leader's best quality. So as a leader, how do you know if your authenticity is really connecting with your team?
Well, and I think one might be, are you connecting with your own authenticity first, and then understanding if it's connecting? So if it's okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about how do we even know we're being authentic? It sounds like a rhetorical question, but I find that it's not, especially in an age where I get the sense people wear a lot of armor, a lot of protection, and making sure we're finding that authenticity as opposed to the reactive pieces and just responding to what's being thrown at us. When I work with leaders, I really like to say leadership is not a cookie cutter. It is not something that you take yourself and you push yourself into. It's like, the little cookie cutter where it's a star and you're pushing all yourself into the star. And some of it is going to be left on the edges. You may have an organization full of perfect little stars, but you are leaving some of you on the table. So for me, authenticity, and there may be folks out there that see it differently, and that's okay. I work with leaders to start at their core. Who are you at your core? What are your values? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What is it you want? Who is the leader you want to be? And I find that some leaders don't know that. We are spending so much time in how we're presenting ourselves or responding to other people's expectations. We haven't sometimes even thought about it. So what I would say is first, that is the piece of it. Then it's about, sometimes people think authenticity is bringing everything all at once, no boundaries, and that's not it. But it is about thinking, okay, here now is the situation in which I'm leading, and there are different situations. So how I bring myself to that situation may look different, but that does not mean it is not authentic. It does not mean it doesn't have integrity. It just means that there are ways we may need to tap into ourselves differently based on what it will take to succeed with our teams and with the business.
I love answering a question with a question. And when you said, are you being authentic with yourself? That's really the question here. And give me an example of what it looks like to not set a boundary. What does that look like?
And I think part of this has been, some of it may be who the leader is just naturally and not so good at boundaries. Some of it, I think, is trying to integrate all this information that we get about what does it mean to be authentic and how do we show up and how do we connect with people. And if you don't know that, sometimes you're just trying things out. And if people aren't giving you feedback, which a lot of leaders don't get feedback, people are editing themselves around them. Being authentic with your team and sharing is really about being able to say things like, I don't know, let's take a look at it. I'd like to use your experience. The boundary piece starts to be, I'm sharing everything all at once, all my emotions, walking into a meeting, say, with the CEO or with the board and coming back and saying, oh my gosh, they completely, it was just gut wrenching. I got just, bulldozed, all of this. And that is true and it's authentic. it's not helpful. It's not your job as a leader. So your job as a leader, and it's a balance. You are there to protect your team from, I'm just going to say the stuff that rolls down, so that you're buffering them in order for them to be able to do their work and be successful. That is part of our job as a leader. It does not mean we put them in isolation, in a bubble, so that they don't understand context. They don't understand some of the dynamics. They absolutely have to. And sometimes people say, oh, the message needs to be cascaded down. Well, no, like if you're standing at the bottom of a waterfall that's hundreds of feet high, you're going to be crushed. Really has to happen is more of a step down. As a leader, how are you taking away the message, the vision, the strategy for the organization, buffering out all of some of those politics and the crappy stuff that is not going to add to the success of your team? And how do you bring it down to, okay, as a leader, I have the vision, I have the strategy, I'm going to communicate that to you. And now let's talk about how to make that actionable. How is it that you, the person on my team, can have that impact? And without the boundaries, they may get all the emotion, they may get a lot of the garbage that comes in. And I think for all of us out there, we know that when you get people in groups, there's always politics. So if you're not filtering a lot of that or providing boundaries for your team that are healthy and effective, they're going to drown. They're not going to be able to focus on their priorities. They're not going to be able to help the team, help themselves, help the company be successful.
Filter is such a great word. And so I'm hearing you say, yes, ask, is this message that I'm trying to deliver authentic to myself first? And then second, is it helpful in this scenario? Love that. And I'm loving the imageries that you're giving, like being at the bottom of a waterfall. That's incredible. Love that. So how much does being authentic as a leader have to do with how something lands with your team?
I think it goes back to, we have this authenticity, and our communication as a leader, it has to be impactful. We can be authentic, but if our communication doesn't actually have the impact, if it isn't landing with people, they don't understand what that means for them, then I don't even want to say it's just not helpful or effective. It's not the job of a leader. You're not communicating what needs to be heard. That's really important. So it's, authenticity is more of a starting place. The communication itself is a tool. It's a way of helping gain alignment. It's a way of helping provide context. So being authentic is not enough.
It's a starting point. And there are moments when leaders have to make an unpopular call, right? They have to make a decision that not everyone loves, but they have more context. Maybe it's restructuring, letting someone go, or maybe there's a firm decision they have to make that others don't like. So how does a leader show up authentically in those moments when their values are clear, but the perception could easily turn into that they don't care or they're not in touch with the team?
Absolutely. There's two pieces to that. I think the broader piece one is change is hard and people do not like it. Even change we impose on ourselves, it's stressful. Even when we say we want to grow, and we do, and I talk about that in my book about kind of going through the goo of change. And so that piece is normal. That is the way we're wired. That is not going to change. Now, what we can do, and I know you've talked on your podcast before about kind of, how our brains work and what that means and how do we, adjust feedback or all of those things. That's really important to know. It's important to understand, how do people tend to receive information and how do you strengthen what can be, helpful, and how do you mitigate the things that could be very damaging? And starting out, I think leaders who can be very close to the information, we forget when we're that close, we forget how much people don't know. We don't truly understand the gaps in their language, and we may think it's a tiny little, kind of crack, and they may see it as, crevasse, like, the Grand Canyon in order to jump over. And so I think first, the leader has to really think through their communication. Some people I just like to wing it. I would not recommend that. I have yet to see where that is an effective strategy other than for entertainment. If you're up there just giving an entertaining, note or whatever you're doing, then you know what? Have at it. If you're talking about a big change that's going to be very stressful, that needs to be really thought through. And starting with, what is the objective? Why am I doing this? We hear a lot about the why. Why is this important to us? Why is this important to the organization? Tapping it back into what we're trying to achieve and the values and how this connects is really important. So you're talking about your intent. And I talk a lot about the fact that we judge ourselves by our intent. Other people judge us by their experience of us, how they really walk away, how they feel in that experience. And so being able to take that and try to step into their perspective, and maybe even getting the perspective of some people around you that may be able to help, with this big change. And acknowledging that this is hard. It's not trying to kind of sugarcoat it or saying, oh, this raw. When people are scared, they don't want that. They do want to know that you're solid and that they feel safe following you, but nobody wants to have sugarcoating. I had a contractor once, hope he's not listening to this, wonderful guy, but every time he would come, and you know how it is, that something happens unanticipated, so it's going to cost more money, and he'll come and he would just have this big smile on his face. And I told him, I said, you need to stop that, because every time you do that, I feel like you don't care. I feel like you don't feel this is important to me. And he's like, I really appreciate that. I was given the feedback earlier in my career that I was supposed to smile when I gave bad feedback. And I said, it does not feel genuine.
Oh, because it's contradicting, right? It's like the body language, the nonverbal cues associated with your verbal language it's in conflict.
You talk about that integrity, because people talk a lot of times about integrity, about doing what you know is right. Integrity is also, for me anyway, that what you say and what you do. And if there is not a connection between those things, people will revert to believing what you do. They will look to that before they believe what you say. But if those are not in line, there is a lack of integrity there. And back to the contractor, he had been told something earlier in his career that honestly, I don't know the context that anybody would tell us. And he may have misinterpreted it, but my guess is there are a lot of leaders out there that have been given advice that is actually detrimental to them being able to communicate. I think the last thing I want to say, because I know this is a really long answer to this, is you're being candid, and sometimes leaders can't say everything that they know. And even acknowledging that, this is the piece that I can communicate, knowing that it's difficult. Do not assume that having one town hall is enough to help people through very difficult times. That is maybe a jumping off point. That may not even be the place you want to jump off. You may want to start with, say, conversations with your next layer of leaders down. In fact, I would recommend this. You want to prepare your team to be able to go out. People are always going to be surprised, but let them be surprised in private when they're your leaders, and they're going to have to be accountable for the message too. And then think about, what is it you need to be communicating? How do you do that? Because different messages need to show up in different kind of channels, media, however you want to think about it. Some messages, great for town hall. Some messages have to be one-on-one. Don't assume you've had the town hall and you're done and it's good. Especially in times that are difficult, there's a lot of change and stress. People are wired to assume the worst. So anytime there's a gap or they don't understand something, they're going to go to the worst case scenario. And maybe it is, but a lot of times it's not. And that mindset does not help people move through change.
Absolutely. And what I tell my executive team is, in the absence of information, stories are created. What story do you want to be created? Right. And I want to go back to one of the points that you made around potentially leaders having misguided information in their practices of being a leader. And I think that's so important, because whether you're a brand new leader or you're a super experienced leader, you've been doing leadership roles for a long time, it's always important to check your practice. What do you recommend leaders do to have a mirror held up so they can see blind spots?
I think, and one of the things I love about what you said is that, first it is about understanding kind of and checking themselves on what they've been taught, how they're experiencing it. There are very good things that we're taught that we want to emulate. There are things that we're taught that we figure out we've learned that we don't want to do those things. And I think that's a place to start. First of all, how are we experiencing the impact we're having? Is there a connection, or, if something not happening? And if there's not, like if there's a negative impact or something, leaders, we have to look to ourselves first. It is very easy to say, well, the team's not doing this or they're not doing this. And fundamentally, it starts with us. Second, have people around you that will tell you the truth. Going back to the fact that, people naturally edit themselves in a hierarchy. And, there are companies that like to consider themselves as completely flat. And here's the thing. Yeah, some companies are flatter than other companies. No company, no group of people is a flat hierarchy. Not even in a family. You've got parents that have more power than, the kids, usually. And it shouldn't be flat completely, because somebody has to make a decision. Somebody has to lead the charge. But what happens is, as we go up the ladder or up the matrix or whatever it is, people naturally start to edit themselves. There is a power differential, and we are wired to sense that power, protect ourselves, etc. Having people around you who will tell you the hard truth is critical. Otherwise, do you remember the story, the children's story, The Emperor's New Clothes, or The Emperor Has No Clothes? I'm probably dating myself. Maybe they don't read it to kids anymore. So the gist of it is, this tailor comes to the village and he's talking to the king about the beautiful clothes that he can make. Extremely talented, and even his reputation may have preceded him. So he goes away, he fits, kind of does all the measurements. He goes away and he brings back the king what he says are beautiful clothes. And they're invisible. I'm doing air quotes. There are no clothes, but the king doesn't want to look silly by saying he doesn't see what's there. And so he says, these are beautiful. Or he says to one of his main people, he's like, what do you think? Well, that person doesn't want to look stupid either. So they're like, oh, they're lovely. They're this. And it goes out into several circles until the king is in a parade, walking down the center of town, completely without clothes. And it takes a small child to yell out, he's naked. He has no clothes. And it's a great analogy, because no leader wants to go out naked into, whether literally or metaphorically, and be so out of touch with the organization because no one has told them. Another friend of mine talks about, and he's English or British, and he says, everywhere the queen goes, it smells like paint. And it's because leaders come and, they'll spiff up the area. They try to again, sugarcoat, all of that, make everything good. And the leaders need to be able to have people who will tell them the truth. Are they having impact? Are they having positive impact? Where are they having negative impact? Because we're all going to do things wrong. All of us. And expecting to find that. And if you don't hear anything that's negative, know that you are in trouble. You need to ferret out what that stuff is, because you are not perfect. I am not perfect. Nobody's perfect. So that's a really good red flag if you're not hearing anything where you need to change or you need to shift.
I agree. In organization development or organizational psychology, that story that you just shared, that children's story, translates to a concept called, I know it as the Abilene paradox. And this is that group dynamic where people will agree on a course of action that they don't want for themselves individually. And there's a pressure to kind of go along with the group, to conform, fear of speaking up. And I also see, as the higher up you go in an organization, the more intimidation there is to say something, right? Because of that power dynamic that we sense, like you were saying, to kind of avoid conflict. So interesting, just bringing that in from our field. I think that's so fun that a children's tale can really teach you about some of these other dynamics. And
Yes.
I also have like this thought too around, want to know, like, how do you know if you've grown as a leader? Think back to how you were as a leader a few years ago. And if you cringe, that's good. That's a good sign. So it's like, if you can look back and be like, whoa, I cannot believe so there's progress, there's evolution. And we're talking a lot about communication and how people perceive things. One of the other things, aside from just being authentic with self in communicating, that's equally as important is empathy. Or, yeah, it's part of emotional intelligence, right? It's a whole domain. But empathy in terms of able to relate to others, because I heard you say earlier, like when you're filtering things out, you really need to be able to put yourself in their shoes. What's really useful and important. But I also think this is where executive presence starts to intersect with authenticity and empathy. And everyone knows it when they see it. Executive presence. It's a calm kind of confidence that makes people lean in and listen, right? And it's one of those like charismatic qualities that a lot of leaders try to cultivate. What do you see as the unseen work that leaders need to do behind the scenes to show up with that authentic executive presence?
I think that's a really good question. And I think the combination of authentic and executive presence is important. One thing, and I'll just kind of put it out there first, is especially in the West, maybe even more especially in the US, we have this cult of personality, as they call it, that we think all good leaders have to be, these extroverts that are on stage, that are inspiring, that are all of that. Don't get me wrong. It's not that those folks can't be good leaders. It's also the fact that there are folks who are more introverted, who are the folks who really take time to contemplate, that may inspire in different ways. So it's really important to understand who you are, going back to that authenticity and then showing up. Yes, are there things where as an extrovert, we may need to pull back? Are there things as an introvert where we may need to reach out and understand some of that? Absolutely. Executive presence mostly is about, it can look a little different, but I think to your point, the challenge is we know it when we see it. My experience is more of, to your point, not only just calm, but solid. Do people feel confident that you have a vision of where they're going, that they feel comfortable? You hate the term follow people into battle, but that's a lot of what it is, metaphorically anyway. I mean, sometimes, obviously in the military, it's actually what it is. People need to feel safe. Even under stress, they need to feel that you are confident in where you're going. And even if there are times when, yes, this is going to be challenging everybody, this is going to be this, but they feel like you're grounded and you know what it is that they're going to do next, even through the unknown, that you are going to take them forward. And some of that shows up in body language. It shows up in how we stand and confident, and it shows up in our voice and the quality of our voice. It doesn't have to be loud and extroverted. The whole, I think it was Teddy Roosevelt that used to say, I speak softly, but I carry a big stick. I think it's most important that, first of all, leaders, again, do not go back to a cookie cutter, that they have to have an effective executive presence. To your point, it has to land with the team, but not everybody has to look like these bigger than life, over the top leaders. And I think when someone who maybe isn't that way, but who really genuinely cares for their team, they're confident in where they're going, if they try to turn themselves into that, that's going to be not only a waste of energy, but it's going to be that incongruous kind of approach, that dissonance. Mm-hmm. And it's not going to serve anyone because people will see it. And I just finished talking to a leader right before we got on the call. And we were talking about doing a town hall. And again, just one kind of medium or one way of communicating. And he was giving me examples of how other leaders that he looks up to do this. And we talked about, what's effective, what's not. And I said, that's great. The question becomes, what's the impact you want to have? Who are you and how do you want to come across to have that impact? So let's talk about that rather than trying to be this other person who can be effective in his or her own way. Great. Let's go back to who are you as a leader? How do you want to come across? What is the impact and the effect you want to have with your team? What is it you want to land? What is it you want them to take away from these experiences? Based on that and who you are, then let's plan. Let's figure out what that looks like for you.
And this is where an executive coach or a coach would be a really good partnership with a leader, because there's no shame in not knowing some of these things. The challenge is showing up as a leader inauthentically. So to be able to kind of tool yourself with some of the answers to those questions is like your first step. And I think you've hit on something so profound that executive presence it's not about performing. It's about amplifying who you already are, right? And everyone is different. So you're going to have to create your own unique blueprint. And just as you know when you see it with executive presence, you also know you see it when someone's trying to project too hard on that presence. And in your work, I imagine you've seen firsthand when leaders who mean well may end up making, some missteps. And maybe they're trying to lead authentically, but haven't really figured out the formula. And I'm curious, what's one mistake you've seen experienced leaders make in this space, and how might that impact not just their authenticity, but their ability to own the room with executive presence?
One of the things I've seen, and I was just thinking about this morning, I had worked with a leader who would fly off the handle at kind of the drop of a hat. Very powerful personality. He knew what he was doing. People respected him for his knowledge, his expertise. And I think in his mind, he felt that was a show of strength. That was, demonstrating that the power in the room and that, he was in control, or he would challenge people in a way. And it's not that you don't want to challenge people. You do. And it's not that he doesn't have the right to be frustrated. He does. But is that impactful? And there are times that, showing a lot of emotion, and again, not in a way that's detrimental and undermining, people, but showing more emotion and having the emphasis can be very effective. If in every meeting you show up as emotional and people know that they have to walk on eggshells around you, two things. One, like back to the whole filtering process, you're not going to get the information that you want. And two, if you're always showing up like that, people habituate, which we have to. We get used to whatever our situation is. We get used to, our homes. We get used to the, even it's funny, your body gets used to it. So most of the time we do not think about all the information coming in. We don't think about how our butts feel sitting in the chair, your feet on the floor, your clothes on your back. We have to habituate. We have to let that information kind of go so we can focus on the things ahead of us. The problem is, if you consistently show up as big and emotional, then people aren't going to know what's really important. They're going to start to hear it as like, oh, they're blustering again. Oh, they're that. Or, oh, I can't tell them that because they're just going to lose their cool. And it becomes this really detrimental situation. So it comes back to, you get to be passionate. You get to want to inspire. You get to want to be clear about the feedback when things aren't going well. But let's look at what works. Is that, are you coming in to really want to have a positive impact, get the results you want? Or are you really just coming in to let off some steam? And I'll tell you, the first, the letting off steam part, going back to, that's not your job as a leader. And let's just go back to because I have leaders say, well, is this the right way or is that the wrong way? What works? Instead of worrying about what I think or what I say is right or wrong, let's look at what works. And let's not do the thing that doesn't work. Let's do more of the thing that does.
That kind of brings me to this next question around how authenticity is not static, right? It's a living, breathing thing that grows as we do. And leaders change as they move through their careers. And what feels authentic in maybe one stage may not serve them in the next. And how do leaders adapt their authentic selves as they grow into more senior, visible roles without losing that core identity? I think about this myself, but I also have coached clients who have gone through several seasons or chapters of life as a leader and are reevaluating what their core identity is.
I go back to, do we want to grow? And you were saying, if you look back and cringe, or you look back on the mistakes that you've made, which we have you learned from that? Are you the same leader today that you were 10 years ago? Hopefully the answer is no.
Exactly.
So how do you reconcile that? And part of it is as you grow and as you learn from your mistakes, and especially going back to how do people see your integrity as a leader? If they see things that are off, that, well, you did this the one time, and it's not even maybe over years. It maybe is in just different situations. I could learn from a meeting that morning going into a meeting that afternoon. Now that seems very rapid, but it's real. We have these aha moments. Sometimes it's like that spark of somebody else's perspective speaks to us in a way, and we open up our minds and we see the world differently, and we can never go back and see it the way we saw it before. So acknowledging change, I think first and foremost to ourselves, and being vulnerable about that. Too often as leaders, as people, we want to pretend that we have it all figured out. We're all good. And it's important that other people see us as being, very much in control of ourselves and knowing who we are. And that's great. Hopefully we do know who we are. Now, who we are may morph, but acknowledging those changes, acknowledging them first for yourself, and then acknowledging them to other people. You can even say, look, I made this decision before. This is where we were going. Here are maybe some of the things that have changed for me. And that, again, that is vulnerability. That's another word, right? Vulnerability. And it's not about, again, showing up and just like dumping on everything. It is about acknowledging your own growth, how you've changed, your mindset, what you've done well in the past, what you haven't done, and here's why I'm going to change it. Here's what I've learned, and here's the impact I want to have, and just owning it.
Really?
We are going to grow and change. And if we can't allow ourselves to do that, we're probably doing it anyway, but people will sense it as inauthentic if we can't pull that together for ourselves.
I love ownership, owning and taking accountability. And Rachel, you've given us so much to think about, from this delicate balance of like vulnerability to credibility. But what I love most is this idea that authenticity and growth, they're not in conflict. They're not at odds. They're actually partners in leadership. And I want to ground this in something tangible. If you had to leave leaders with just one piece of advice, a next step that they could take tomorrow to show up both more authentically and with stronger executive presence, what would that be?
I would say it's a great question, by the way. I would say I think it's very important to let's focus on something small. A lot of times people focus on leadership as this big, and don't get me wrong, I love sitting in a coffee shop and talking theory with people. Fabulous. Love it. It's not actionable. So let's take it down to the actionable. Talk about what is one value that you feel maybe most strongly about, or if there's a few values, great, pick one. How are you representing that in your leadership? Where is it showing up? If it's not, then what is it you need to do about that? Where do you want to take that forward? Is it something you're protecting, or you don't think it's valuable in the context you're in? It's valuable for you. So think about how you want to bring that to whatever context you're in, where you're leading, and then experiment. See how it shows up. This is not it's a all or nothing thing. It's about, okay, I want to try this. Go out and do that.
There's so much power in that. And especially when you talk about finding value in the context that you're in, once you can integrate, I think about this with like shadow work, like the integration side of like light and dark. And when you can start integrating your values that you internalize across all domains and all contexts in your life, there's going to be a lot more peace, I imagine, with an individual. So I want to thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and just kind of helping us rethink what it means to lead authentically and with presence. And for our listeners, I hope today's conversation leaves you reflecting on your own leadership journey and just gives you a new lens for how you show up on your teams, for your teams, and more importantly, for yourself. How do people contact you, Rachel, if they want to get a hold of you or connect?
That's great. Well, a couple of things. One, my website is just catamintum.com. I believe it'll be in the show notes. Then Rachel M, as in Maureen, Burr. And then my new book is coming out Tuesday, January 21st. Very excited. Already on pre-order. It is called Butterfly Goo, The Down and Dirty Truth of Transformation. And even there are exercises in the back of this book. So to your point, being able to kind of take some of this, it's a humorous memoir, but the exercises are there if you want to play around with your own change, growth, and transformation. And on the website, if you go on the upper right-hand corner, you can download those now. You don't have to buy the book. You can just download them and start experimenting.
Amazing. I cannot wait to get that book. That sounds perfect. Thank you so much, Rachel, for your time. I really appreciate all of the insights that you were able to bring to us today. And thanks, listeners, for tuning in.